The air conditioning had been making that noise for 3 days. A soft rattling. Most people wouldn't notice, but Luis Mendoza noticed everything. That's what 15 years as a maintenance technician did to you. Made you hear problems before they became emergencies. It was 7:45 a.m. The corporate tower was filling with employees, suits, laptops, coffee cups. They walked past Luis like he was furniture. He was used to it. He'd fixed the heating in their offices, cleared clogs from their break room sinks, replaced light bulbs above their desks. But they didn't see him. Not really. This morning, though, Luis wasn't thinking about being invisible. He was thinking about the air handler on the 19th floor, the one that had been making that rattling sound, the one that fed the entire East Wing, including the server room, the room that housed the company's primary data center, the room that was supposed to stay at exactly 68 degrees. Luis had submitted 3 work orders about the rattling, all marked low priority, all delayed. And now, standing in the basement mechanical room, looking at the temperature gauge for the 19th floor, Luis saw the number he'd been afraid of, 73 degrees, and climbing. If you've ever known something was wrong but feared no one would believe you, stay with me. Luis Mendoza was 49 years old, maintenance technician at Hexagon Financial Services for 15 years. Before Hexagon, he'd worked at a manufacturing plant. Before that, a hospital. Always the same job. Fixing things. Keeping systems running. Being invisible. He was good at it. His supervisors knew that. His performance reviews said so. But good maintenance meant nothing went wrong. And when nothing goes wrong, people forget you exist. Luis had learned that early. He'd also learned something else, that speaking up could cost you. 7 years ago at the hospital, Luis had noticed a problem with the backup generator, a fuel line leak. Small, easy to miss. But Luis knew that small leaks became big failures. He'd reported it to his supervisor, told him it needed immediate attention. His supervisor said they'd handle it during the next scheduled maintenance. 2 weeks. Luis pushed, said it couldn't wait. The supervisor got irritated, asked if Luis was questioning his judgment. Luis backed down. 3 days later, the hospital lost power during a storm. The backup generator failed. Fuel leak caused a fire. No one died, but 2 patients on ventilators went into distress. Luis had been right, but he'd also been blamed for not pushing harder, for not going over his supervisor's head, for not doing more. The hospital fired him quietly. No formal reason, just a layoff during restructuring. Luis knew the truth. He'd been right, and it had cost him everything. So when he started at Hexagon, he learned to stay quiet, do the work, submit the reports, let someone else make the decisions. It was safer that way. But this morning, looking at that temperature gauge, Luis felt the same knot in his stomach he'd felt 7 years ago. He pulled out his phone, called his supervisor. No answer. Left a voicemail. 19th floor server room overheating, AC handler failing, need immediate shutdown and repair. Then he went upstairs. The 19th floor was quiet. Most people didn't come in this early, but the server room was always staffed, climate controlled, secure access only. Luis didn't have clearance. He stood outside the locked door, looked through the small window. Inside, rows of servers hummed. Lights blinked. Everything looked normal, except for the temperature display on the wall. 76 degrees. Luis's chest tightened. He knocked on the door. A young IT technician opened it. Yeah? There's a problem with the AC handler, Luis said. The room's overheating. The tech glanced at the temperature display. It's only 76. That's within tolerance. For now, Luis said. But the handler's failing. It's going to get worse. The tech shrugged. The system's designed to alert us if it hits critical. We're fine. He closed the door. Luis stood there, staring at the closed door. He could walk away, submit another work order, let the system handle it. That's what he was supposed to do. That's what he'd learned to do. But he knew what happened when you trusted systems over instincts. People got hurt. Equipment failed. And the person who'd known all along got blamed for not doing more. Luis pulled out his phone again, called his supervisor. Still no answer. He tried the facilities manager. Voicemail. The director of operations. Voicemail. It was 7:55 a.m. Most management didn't arrive until 9. Luis looked at the temperature display again. 78 degrees. He made a decision. He walked to the elevator, took it to the 23rd floor. Executive wing. He'd never been up here. Never had a reason to. The floors were polished. The walls were art. The receptionist looked at him like he'd wandered into the wrong building. "Can I help you?" Luis looked down at his work uniform, his tool belt, his worn boots. Then he looked up. "I need to speak to someone about the server room." The receptionist frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then you'll need to schedule through facilities management." "This is urgent," Luis said. "The server room is overheating. If it's not shut down now, we're going to lose critical systems." The receptionist's expression didn't change. "I'll pass that along. But you can't be up here without clearance." Luis didn't move. "I'm not leaving until someone listens." 5 minutes later, a man in a suit appeared. Mid-40s, confident stride. He looked at Luis the way people look at problems they didn't create. "I'm David Reyes, VP of Operations." "What's this about?" Luis explained. "The rattling, the work orders, the rising temperature, the failing AC handler." Reyes listened. Then he pulled out his phone. Checked something. "The monitoring system shows no alerts," he said. "Everything's green." "The system's lagging," Luis said. "By the time it alerts, it'll be too late." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been doing this for 15 years. And I know the sound of a compressor failing. And I know what happens when server rooms overheat." Reyes studied him. Then he said, "If I shut down that server room and you're wrong, we lose millions in productivity. If you don't shut it down and I'm right," Luis said, "you lose everything." There was a long pause. Reyes made a call. "This is Reyes. I need a temperature reading from the 19th floor server room. Now." He waited. His expression changed. "What do you mean 81 degrees? How long has it been climbing?" He looked at Luis. "You're sure the AC handler is the problem?" "Yes." Reyes made another call. "Shut down the 19th floor server room. Full system shutdown. Emergency protocol. Move all traffic to the backup site. Do it now." He hung up. Then he looked at Luis. "If you're wrong, this conversation isn't over." "If I'm wrong," Luis said, "I'll resign." "You won't have to fire me." Reyes didn't respond. He just walked toward the elevator. Luis followed. 19th floor. The server room was chaos. IT staff rushing. Managers barking orders. The temperature display read 83 degrees. The shutdown took 12 minutes. By the time they finished, the temperature was 86 degrees. The AC handler died at 87, smoke visible through the vents. If the servers had still been running, the heat would have fried them. Millions in equipment. Weeks of recovery. Regulatory violations. Lawsuits. All avoided. Because Luis had spoken up. The IT manager approached Luis afterward. "How did you know?" "The rattling," Luis said. "It's been going on for 3 days. I submitted work orders. No one responded." The manager's face went red. He walked away without another word. Reyes came over. "You saved us," he said. Luis shook his head. "I just did my job." "No," Reyes said. "You did more than that. You went past 3 levels of hierarchy to tell me something I didn't want to hear. That takes guts." Luis didn't feel brave. He felt tired and a little scared because he'd broken every rule, gone around his supervisor, interrupted executives, demanded action without authority. Any of those things could have gotten him fired. But he'd been right, and this time, being right hadn't cost him. It had saved something. 2 days later, Luis was back in the basement mechanical room, replacing the AC handler. His supervisor walked in. Didn't say anything at first, just watched Luis work. Then he spoke. "You made me look bad." Luis stopped, looked up. "I submitted 3 work orders. You marked them low priority. Because the system didn't flag it as critical." "The system was wrong," Luis said, "and you knew that." His supervisor's jaw tightened. "You should have come to me first." "I did. You didn't answer, so I went to someone who would." The supervisor stared at him. Then he turned and walked out. Luis went back to work. He didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel proud. He just felt like he'd made the right choice, and that was enough. A week later, David Reyes called Luis to his office. Luis had never been in an executive office before. It was bigger than his apartment. Reyes gestured to a chair. "Sit." Luis sat. "I wanted to thank you," Reyes said. "Properly." "You don't need to," Luis said. "Yes, I do. You prevented a disaster. And you risked your job to do it. I've been in corporate leadership for 20 years, and I've seen people bury problems, deflect blame, protect their positions, but I've rarely seen someone with nothing to gain step forward and do the right thing. You did that, and I won't forget it." Luis didn't know what to say. Reyes continued, "I'm also issuing a new protocol. Any maintenance technician who identifies a critical issue can escalate directly to operations. No bureaucracy, no delays. If you see something, you call me." Luis blinked. "You're doing that because of this?" "I'm doing that because it should have been in place already. You shouldn't have had to fight your way up here to be heard. That's a failure on our part, not yours." He paused. "Your supervisor is being reassigned, and you're being promoted to senior maintenance engineer, with a 20% raise and direct reporting to facilities management." Luis stared at him. "I don't need a promotion." "Maybe not," Reyes said, "but you've earned it, and more importantly, this company needs people who speak up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Luis left the office in a daze. 20% raise, senior engineer, direct reporting. It felt surreal, but what stayed with him wasn't the money or the title. It was Reyes's words. You shouldn't have had to fight your way up here to be heard, because that was the truth. Luis had done the right thing, but he'd had to break every rule to do it. And if he'd been wrong, he'd be unemployed right now. That was the problem with being invisible. No one listened until it was almost too late. And even when you were right, you had to prove it at great personal risk. Luis wondered how many other people like him had seen problems, had known something was wrong, but had stayed quiet because they'd learned that speaking up cost more than staying silent. Months later, Luis was having coffee in the break room when a young maintenance tech approached him. Nervous, hesitant. "Mr. Mendoza?" Luis looked up. "Yeah? I heard what you did. With the server room." The kid shifted his weight. "I wanted to ask you something. How did you know?" "Know what?" "That it was worth the risk. To speak up." Luis thought about it. Then he said, "I didn't. No, I was terrified. I thought they'd fire me. But I also knew that if I stayed quiet and something bad happened, I'd never forgive myself. So I took the risk. And I got lucky. But not everyone does." The kid nodded. "That's what scares me." "What?" "That I'll see something wrong and I won't say anything. And then it'll be too late." Luis set down his coffee. "Then you have to decide what matters more. Being safe or being right." The kid was quiet. Then he said, "What if I'm wrong?" "Then you learn, and you move on. But at least you tried." The kid nodded again, walked away, and Luis sat there, thinking about all the times he'd stayed quiet. All the times he'd let systems and protocols override his instincts. He didn't regret the choices he'd made to survive, but he was glad he'd finally made a different choice, even if it had taken 15 years. Years later, people at Hexagon would tell the story of the maintenance tech who'd saved the company's data center. Some versions exaggerated, made Luis a hero, made the crisis more dramatic, made the ending triumphant, but Luis never corrected them, because the truth was simpler and less inspiring. He was just a guy who'd noticed something wrong, and after years of being invisible, after years of learning that speaking up cost too much, he'd decided that this time, staying silent would cost more. That was it. No grand speech, no dramatic confrontation. Just a man in a work uniform standing in an executive office saying, "Something's wrong, and you need to listen." Most of the time, the world doesn't reward people like Luis, people who see problems others miss, people who speak up when it's easier to stay quiet, people who risk everything to do what's right. Most of the time, those people stay invisible. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone listens, and that makes all the difference. If this story reached you, Share where you're watching from.